All right, that's the first of the practices. Second is the path of knowledge. So, again, a quote here from the Vedanta treatise. True knowledge arises out of an internal discipline of reflection and contemplation upon the eternal truths. So it simply means that we are questioning at all times. So we've got our humility, we've got our devotion to say, I don't know. While we are in that state of receptivity, we then question what is true, what is real, what is unchanging. So this is why we call Vedanta the knowledge of higher values. So what is a value? So when I say I have a value for something, it means that I believe it can make me happy. Again, I value my relationship with this person because I know that it makes me happy. A person values more and more money because he wrongly believes it will make him more and more and more happy. So when we talk about higher values, we're talking about those values which are an accurate reflection of the reality. Simple example. The more money I get, the happier I will become. It's a value, it's a belief that I hold. How true is it?
It's not true because it's temporary.
It's not true. It's not 100% false, because if you have no money, if you're homeless, a little bit of increase in money will actually make you happier. To live on the streets with no food, I don't know where my next meal is coming from, and so on and so forth, wretched, misery. If I get enough money to take care of the basics, my subjective well-being will be improved. But beyond that, the more money I get, it's not that I get happier and happier and happier. So it's got a little bit of truth to it, but it's not wholly true. So a higher value would be what then? Well, exactly what we just said. Money has a limited capacity to make me happy, and it has a diminishing quality. That is a more accurate reflection of the reality. That's what makes it a higher value. So the path of knowledge then is to figure out what really is true. Once we've figured out what is true, we will naturally function towards that. So in terms of seeking that which is eternally true, we're talking about finding whatever is unchanging. So what is the unchanging aspect of all of your experiences? Everything that you've gone through in life. Because when we're talking about investigation, you can only investigate into what you know. All of your life's experiences. So what's the unchanging aspect of that? He gives an example here. When we are very young, we say, I am a girl. Later on, I am a woman. Later on, I am an old woman. The girl, the woman, and the old woman are not the same. They are the changing aspects of the personality. What's the unchanging aspect? I am. So this is why we often say then that the path of knowledge is to gain self-awareness, capital S. What is that unchanging sense of I that pervades through all of my experiences? So as a practice, there are different aspects to it. The first is daily philosophical reflection. Now it's important that we choose a text wisely here. Any old book will not work. We've got to pick a text that we are confident is describing these fundamental values of human life. Once we have chosen that text, pick a quiet time and place. Between 4 and 6 a.m. he calls it sattvika time. It's when the environment is at its most calm. The mind tends to be more calm because it hasn't yet started to get engaged in the external world and its activities. So the intellect is able to question. And this is exactly what we do. Once we have started to question and understand the principles, the idea is to apply them in daily life. So this becomes another part of our reflection. Okay, here he's talking about unselfishness leads to happiness. Great. How do I practice unselfishness? Think about it. Come to a conclusion and then integrate the practice into daily life. This is also part of the path of knowledge. It's not just enough for us to think about it. Think about and integrate. So where can I integrate these practices? The other aspect is at the end of the day, introspection. Introspection is the recollection of the day's activities, start to finish, with no analysis, no judgment, no thinking or questioning. It's nothing other than remembering. We go through everything that we did and we just observe how we conducted ourselves throughout the day. We start to become more aware of those times where we were able to apply the principles and where we were not. So it's generating an awareness of our own personality and where we are falling short of the principles that we are reflecting upon in the morning study. So when it comes to our practice of reflection, there's a few points that we can discuss as to how it's done. So once we have found a book that we would like to read or listen to a lecture that we want to hear or whatever it is, we go through and pull out the salient points. Just the main ideas, the main concept, and note them down separately so that we get a bullet point list of the most important ideas. Second aspect is to make sure that we can define all of the terms that are being used. The problem is that when we hear words like selfishness, intellect, sin, self-control, spirituality, God, etc., we will immediately place our own preconceived notions as to what these mean. It's important that we stop, and even words that we believe we are very familiar with. What is the definition of this term? What does selfishness mean? What is sin? Because if we don't do this, then what can happen is that we enter into the study with a preconceived idea and we carry that bias all the way through the study. Remembering that the purpose of the study is to find out what is true. Bias is the opposite of truth. Bias is an individual opinion or an individual perspective. Truth is always universal. So why does fake news work? It plays into our existing bias. If I already believe that such and such a person is a bad guy, then when someone says, this guy stole from me, I will immediately believe it because I've got an existing bias. It's an individual opinion or an individual perspective. Truth is always universal. So clearly defining all of the terms is important. The next aspect is coming back to your question from earlier. When you read something, when you hear somebody speaking, they will be giving assertions. So an assertion is a claim about a fact or a truth. Selfishness makes us unhappy. It's an assertion. It's trying to make a claim about truth. Wealth is calamitous, he says in the Bhagavad-Gita. It's an assertion. It's trying to make a claim. Your essential being is eternal. It's an assertion. So the moment we are able to spot an assertion, again we stop. What is the claim that the author is making? And then question, is the reasoning behind this clear? Is it logical? Does it make sense? And thirdly, what's the evidence? What's the evidence to back up the claim the individual is making? The other aspect is that while we are going through the reflection process, we will always come up with our own questions. But what about? Put the questions separately. Don't mix them up with your bullet points. First thing is to try to answer those questions yourself. The practice of trying to answer them ourselves strengthens the intellect. It gives us more flexibility to find the truth. And of course, where we are still confused, we can seek out the advice of others. Another really powerful way that we can reflect, we're sitting alone at our desk in the morning, pretend that there is a person sitting opposite you and they have said, what is this concept? What is this paragraph? What is the thought flow that he's presenting? See if you can explain it to another person, not just in terms of bullet points, but in terms of an actual discourse. So imagine whoever it is and talk to them. The moment we start to speak what we think we know, it becomes obvious to us where we are on thin ice. Well, hang on, I thought I knew this, but when I start to talk about it, it sounds more like maybe I don't know what I am talking about. So it's in trying to explain things to other people that we'll often uncover the areas where we don't understand it as well as we thought. So the reflection becomes contemplation, and the contemplation becomes meditation. So reflection is thinking about the relative aspects of human existence. Contemplation is to think about the transcendental, the absolute. And meditation is to hold the thought of the absolute to the exclusion of all other thoughts. It's a gradual convergence of our thought into that one absolute truth. All right, that's the path of knowledge for the intellect. All right.